Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Laura Washington. I'm a local Chicago journalist. I write for the Chicago Tribune and do work for ABC 7 and have been a proud friend and supporter of great cities for many, many years. So I'm really honored to be able to be here with this stellar panel today. As has been mentioned, this is about an anniversary, but it's also looking at the future. And this panel is going to explore how cities like Chicago can lead in defining the next era of equity, democracy, and community life. This conversation will be highly relevant given that Chicago is ground zero right now for how our values regarding multiracial democracy and living together in urban communities are being contested. The city has been the historic host of the labor and civil rights movements, multiracial and multi-ethnic movements in arts and culture, community development, and urban innovation, and much more. Chicago is a testing ground for how we address our current test of democracy and community. And as I said, Great Cities has lined up a stellar group of public servants to bring us this conversation about what has gone before as well as what is to come. As Teresa mentioned, we don't want to waste precious time with titles. I think the titles and the names of the folks up here are in your program, and I'm going to ask each one of you to reintroduce yourself as we talk. But I want to just kick it off with a little bit of a history question. As we know, it's been 30 years for Great Cities. And I want to ask each one of you, where were you 30 years ago, and what has been the biggest change in the political, social, or cultural landscape since 1995, and how has that impacted the work that you do? I see someone laughing down there at the end. But I'm going to start with Brenda Palms. Please kick it off for us.
We were chuckling right now because to my right, I was saying, were you around 30 years ago? And what was your answer?
Yes, I was. Oh. About 1 year.
Oh, okay. So you got a lot to share with us then.
Yes. So I was in Denver, Colorado, working at the Piton Foundation, also in partnership with the Annie E. Casey Foundation, focusing on identifying ways to help low-income job seekers access work. And I'll add the song. Do you want to know what was happening at that time? I can't do what Flacco did. But this is how we do it. Right?
Perfect. You gotta always get some music in there. So maybe we'll go to that gentleman who was around just a little bit, Reverend Boyd. I mean, could you share with us? Were you here in Chicago? Were you born here in Chicago?
No, so I can tell you where I was 30 years ago. I was in the Low Country of South Carolina, in the home of my great-great-grandparents, John and Rosa Chisholm, and my great-grandmother, Ruthie Chisholm, who turns 89 today.
Oh, all right. Happy birthday.
And the child of two parents who were in college, a mother who was preparing to be a junior at Lander University, and a father who was preparing to be a senior at Clemson University. So that's where I was 30 years ago in the Low Country, South Carolina, in between what we would call a family compound of 5 generations living in one area.
And what does that history tell you about where that brings us to today, your family history and what you've learned from that?
So my family origins are South Carolina, the PD in the Low Country, South Carolina, with migration to New Jersey, New York, Philadelphia, and then other aspects and other cities, rather, of Connecticut. Today, it's not so much, where there was a generational reclamation or return to the land. Once you hit your 5th or 6th decade, you went back south. Mm-hmm. That is not so much the case now, as the politics have reimagined what that looks like for those of us who are considering, do you return, do you not return, or do you stay where you are?
Mm-hmm. Well, you're in a good place right here in Chicago. We want to keep you here, so thank you. All right, I want to open up to anyone else who wants to share where you were 30 years ago, what's been the biggest change in those 30 years, and how has it impacted your work? Anyone want to jump in? And
Hi, everyone.
Reintroduce yourself, please.
Rick Estrada. I'm president and CEO of a place called Metropolitan Family Services here in Chicago. In 1993 was shaped pretty much the rest of my life, and I'll give you a couple of reasons. One, let me make sure the boss isn't here. It was the year I was married. So I was a relatively young guy, and I had just finished my master's program at the University of Chicago's on what they call the Crown School now. And here's a couple of data points that I was looking at on the homicide rates. With the doc over here will know what I'm talking about because I basically stole it from him. In 1993, there were 867 homicides in the city of Chicago. And then if you fast forward to where we are today on the homicide side, and I know I got serious real fast, but I just wanted to take that opportunity. We fast forward to where we are today. We are at 388 homicides, and hopefully none have happened today. And so we're trying to, together as an entire city, trying to stay under 400 homicides, which would make it the lowest number of homicides since 1965, I believe. And so, but there are researchers here at UIC and Northeastern University and the other great universities in town that have, and the Great Cities Institute specifically, that have a responsibility to make sure that we continue to have all the proper data that we can focus on, and that we can also then use it to articulate public policy in a way that benefits the people that we serve. So I just had to take that opportunity to talk about 1993.
Others, Kari.
Yeah, I'll go. Thanks, Laura. Great to see you. My name is Kari Mo. I traveled in from Washington, D.C. this morning. You can keep the booze to yourself. Not about me, about D.C. But so in 1995, I was the chief of staff to Senator Paul Wellstone, widely known and loved progressive senator from Minnesota. I actually have a colleague of mine who we worked together way back in 1995. I think one of the biggest changes I've seen was that's had an impact on pretty much everything we care about, and that is the Supreme Court decision on Citizens United that really opened the floodgates for big money in politics, and it's had an impact on public school policy, how we think about public health, voting rights, guns in our communities, a woman's right to choose, and whether or not we should care about the environment. So Citizens United was a huge change that impacted politics at all levels in negative ways about issues we all care about.
I'll jump in. Juan Salgado, Chancellor of City Colleges of Chicago, and in 1995 I was starting a job at a place called the Resurrection Project in the Pilsen community as a community organizer. And I had just left graduate school not too long ago, after 2 years at a community college, 2 years at a four-year university, and 2 years getting a master's degree in urban planning, with about $8,000 in debt, okay? Which I could pay off, even with a job at a not-for-profit doing community organizing work. And so in some ways, how does it relate to today? It's an entirely different reality in terms of affordability of upward mobility, period, let alone just a college education. And in my role at City Colleges, we have a bigger responsibility as community colleges and a bigger role to play in today's society because affordability has gotten so out of hand, and not just in education, but in every aspect of life.
And affordability, as we all know, is sort of at the center of the national conversation, especially on a political level right now. And I think it's going to continue to be there through the midterms and beyond. So thank you. That's a great point. Ed?
Good afternoon. My name is Ed Yonka. I'm the Director of Communications and Public Policy for the ACLU of Illinois. And in 1995, I was working in the President's office at the American Bar Association. And I spent much of that year following the 1994 midterm elections in Washington, D.C., helping with the ABA's battle to preserve funding for the Legal Services Corporation. And I was thinking as I was coming over here today, I worked with a former president of the ABA who's now gone, and sometimes I think, thankfully so, for George's sake, but George Bushnell, who did a play on words once talking about Newt Gingrich and the Republicans in the House of Representatives by calling them, forgive me, reptilian bastards. And he did that because he was so offended that they would cut funding to the LSC and undermine the rule of law. And what I think about today is that George had no idea how shameless people could be in their attack on the rule of law, and the degree to which all of the seeds of what we're seeing today were being sown in that moment, and we were fighting one fight and didn't realize the greater war that was happening all around us.
Juan Gonzalez, go ahead.
Yeah, well, in 1995, I was working
Just
as
tell it, make sure everybody knows who you are, please.
I'm sorry, what?
You just reintroduce yourself.
My name is Juan Gonzalez. I'm a senior fellow here at UIC Great Cities Institute and the co-host of Democracy Now!, a radio and TV news program. In 1995, I was working as a staff columnist at the New York Daily News, and the mayor at the time was a guy who wasn't that well known across the country by the name of Rudy Giuliani. And as someone earlier mentioned in terms of the crime rate, I think in 1990, 2,000 people were killed in New York City, and throughout the early 90s, it was 1,800 to 1,700 around there. And there was much talk back then by some right-wing think tank groups of this thing called the super predator criminals, youth criminals, of course, which is a complete invention in terms of narratives. And I remember our own newspaper writing about all the people leaving New York City because of the crime rate. The reality was, when you check the census figure at the end of 2000, 700,000 more people were living in New York City than there were in 1990. The population had gone up to 8 million people. So all the narratives about people fleeing, it's a question of what class of people are you talking about? Who was fleeing and who was coming in? And it was largely immigrant working people that were rebuilding the city, actually, with their labor and their low-cost labor. And it was that was the year before we started Democracy Now! We started as a radio and TV radio program only in February of 1996. So we'll be celebrating our 30th anniversary as a show in a few months. And I think the biggest change, obviously, has been the growing, the gap turned into a chasm of wealth inequality in the country, and that's so much of everything else that has resulted, even the growing fascism. It's really an alternative management strategy to deal with how deep the chasm has become between the haves and the have-nots, that they must find ways to hold back dissidents and opposition and defiance in any way they can.
Great point. I think we're going to hopefully dig into that chasm and how we can address it a little bit more. Grace Chan McKibben?
Thank you. Grace Chan McKibben, I'm the Executive Director of Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community, which is based in Chicago's Chinatown. So in 1995, I just started my first full-time job and was expecting our second child. So in some ways, I have similar thoughts about affordability, just like Juan. We were poor PhD students, both of us living in the University of Chicago's dorms, taking care of undergraduate students, 2 of our own little children, and were able to afford living there with, even though dorm and food were taken care of, we had very small graduate student stipends. But what has really changed very little is that my husband is African American, I'm Chinese American. We got married in '91, and we have 4 wonderful children. When we got married in '91, we thought about different places that we could have lived in. Hyde Park was one of the neighborhoods that we thought we could live and have biracial children, biracial Blasian children, and not have the children feel uncomfortable when they were little growing up. In 2025, there's still very few neighborhoods where a family like us would be able to live comfortably. So in some ways, we've gone a very long way. In other ways, we're still much the same.
Yes, we're still fighting segregation. Chicago's been long known as the most segregated, balkanized city in the nation, and we've still got a long way to go on that. David Doig.
Yeah, so I'm David Doig. I'm the president of Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, and in 1995, I was the first deputy commissioner of the city's Department of Planning and Development. This was during the first kind of administration of Mayor Daley, Mayor Richard M. Daley. What was particularly interesting at that time is this is before things like this existed and email, and I remember being in the planning department, and it was a time of tremendous growth in the city. We had just completed museum campus. There was talk about something called Millennial Park that is now kind of a foregone conclusion. And I remember really being encouraged and excited being a part of this new administration. And Mayor Daley went on to remain mayor for another 15 plus years. But what always impressed me about working for Mayor Daley was his commitment to the city first and foremost. He never wanted to be governor or senator. His single purpose in life was to see the city of Chicago grow and develop. It was also a time when he had spent going to European cities and started a lot of this beautification. And I remember particularly one time when he came back, I think it was Hamburg. We got all these notes from clippings and pictures of his trip there, and it was these landscape medians that ultimately we implemented across the city. And it was also the first time I saw a rooftop, green rooftop. And so these things started in the mid-'90s and are now kind of commonplace and I think taken for granted today. But it started through his vision and his ideas around the city becoming more livable and really focusing on how do we make the harsh kind of urban environment more palatable and more green and sustainable.
Good thing to remember, we have many, many great assets in this city, and we need to celebrate them and remember them, so thank you for that. So I'm going to open up this next question I'm going to open up to anyone. As I mentioned, Chicago's is at ground zero in many ways, which has been a national attack on our values. I'd like to ask from your perspective, what is the most perilous challenge facing Chicago and urban America today, and why is it so dangerous? Anyone? What's the most perilous, scariest thing we're facing as a city? And
I'll start.
Okay.
So I think I wouldn't necessarily say this is scary, but I think our biggest challenge, and we've all touched on this, is the issue of the wealth gap and particularly affordability. If you look across, there was an article today in Cranes that talked about our housing market and how we really live in two different housing markets. We have a housing market for the wealthy and the resourced and communities that have appreciating home values that works relatively well. And we're outpacing, I think, basically all of the metros in the country in terms of appreciation and property value growth. So you contrast that with the other part of Chicago, which I would argue is the majority of Chicago, which is suffering from deflation, depopulation, and disinvestment. And so we live in this very contorted kind of city, which is a city of wealth and yet great need. And so I think that division and that chasm continues to widen. And I think a lot of our social issues kind of flow from this really deep, both segregation, but also inequality and inequity. And I think in many ways that's the story of America now, writ large. But it's particularly acute in Chicago. And I think until we really start to figure out how development happens equitably, we're going to continue to face issues of violence and disinvestment. A statistic that hit me really hard about 6 months ago is they did an analysis of building permits in the city of Chicago over the last 4 years. And 4 wards, and from those of you from Chicago, you know we have 50 wards. 4 wards accounted for 50% of all residential building permits. Think about that, 50%, and you know the communities, that's Fulton Market, that's South Loop, so you think about that level of investment concentrated in just 4 wards. How can we ever talk about equity or equal distribution if we're not rebuilding all of our neighborhoods?
Great. Good point.
I want to kind of say this as I answer these questions today. I'm speaking from the perspective of a pastor and no relation to my role at the MacArthur Foundation. So I want to put that line in the sand there. So for me, to David's point, I'm going to use a little bit different language to communicate what I believe is the most perilous issue in the city. And it is a tainted theology, anthropology, and sociology. That who you worship, spiritually or non-spiritually, and deem as your God or your Lord, determines who you see as human. And based upon your perspective or your definition of who is human, determines on who you believe is worthy of a quality life in this city. I think what David communicated is who this city worships, which is money, corporations, billionaires, and millionaires. And anybody who does not worship that sector of society is not deemed human. Therefore, your neighborhood or your community is not prioritized as essential in this community.
So can I just pause right there? When you say the city worships, wealth and corporations, who is the city? Are you talking about the powers that be, the people that run the city? Who specifically is doing the worship?
I cannot define that. Oh. That is for each individual to determine their role or their identity in this city.
Okay.
I'm not the God who does that.
Go ahead.
But what I am responsible for doing is naming the harms, naming the theologies, and naming the policies or the politics that make it difficult for people to live in this city. I pastor in a neighborhood that has been very much a residential neighborhood in and out of various demographics and ethnicities for 140 years. Mm-hmm. Our church is evidence of that. We are a church that was established in 1885, completed our current building in 1887. We had everyone from the Shed family was a part of our congregation to the family that was the first editors of the Chicago Tribune that left during white flight in the 1920s. We then became a primarily Japanese American congregation for 20 years. They relocated within this city, and then we have become what we have been since 1955, a majority African American congregation. If you go to Kenwood right now, there is not a grocery store in Kenwood. There is a Whole Foods, a Trader Joe's, and numerous other neighborhood shops in Hyde Park. There is a Mariano's in Bronzeville. There is not a grocery store in Kenwood. That is bad theology, that is bad anthropology, and that is bad sociology, basically communicating to me as a pastor and to the residents of Kenwood, your elected officials and or corporate dealers do not deem you worthy of fresh food. Therefore, you have a higher reality to go to urgent care or a hospital for preventable diseases, which then leads to a microcosm of children committing violence, petty crime, low housing retention because you cannot have a job because you do not have quality access to food that ensures you're healthy, and the list goes on and on and on. So for me, from my spiritual perspective and my responsibility as a faith leader, that is the most perilous issue in this city. Bad theology, bad anthropology, and bad sociology.
Well said, and thank you for making those connections. And you could say that about a number of other Chicago neighborhoods beyond Kenwood. have many of the same challenges. Thank you.
You know, Laura,
Brenda.
I was definitely going to follow up on that, and I didn't follow the instructions on the first question. I got all into the song and not into the answer.
Go
So
ahead.
I wanted to sort of revisit that, but it really connects because I think it's interesting when we first established, and I'm a workforce practitioner in the community of North Lawndale. We've been doing that work for 26 years, of which we're proud that UIC was a partner in helping to found our organization. Dr. Kordesh is here, Davis Jenkins, and many others. But here's the thing that I wanted to say that's interesting is that what's changed is labeling and naming. And what I mean by that is when we first started the work, there were very few ways to talk about someone who had served time. People who have served their time wanting to come back to community was called reentry. But reentry is a thing that happens. What we've learned is that it's important that we help people reintegrate back into society. There was a news story, a national story. CBS came to North Lawndale, to the West Side, to help tell our story. And I was excited because it was about hopefully changing the narrative and showing how a community deeply impacted by mass incarceration and having a high unemployment rate, not because people were lazy, because that was the narrative, right? But because people had been deeply impacted by incarceration and had stigma and the burden and the weight of trying to reintegrate back into their communities. So here comes CBS to do this great story. It's a wonderful piece. We tell a great story. But when we watched the evening news that night, they aired the show, Katie Couric leads with, here's a wonderful story about jailbirds and bees on the west side of Chicago. I kid you not. You can go on our website and find the story. Jailbirds and bees. And so I think that that's the issue. There has been this evolution, fortunately, of how we view individuals who have served the time for the mistakes that they made. From jailbirds, to ex-offenders, to formerly incarcerated, to all the different names. And today, we sit with individuals who have been justice impacted. And what I see in that evolution is recognizing the personhood, from a thing to a person who deserves to be recognized and respected as a person first and with humanity. We've come a long way, but we're still not there. I just also wanted to share that some of you may have visited Montgomery to visit the Legacy Museum. Has anybody been there? Okay, a few. So last summer I went and I toured the museum. I was there for 5 hours. But there was one statement that was in the museum that I just had to take in. And it simply is that slavery never ended in 1865. It evolved. And it evolved into Jim Crow. It evolved into convict leasing. And we experience it today as mass incarceration. And I used to think that, people just made poor choices because they made poor choices. But today what we know and what we didn't know 30 years ago, maybe we did, but we didn't acknowledge it, was that there are very intentional policies and rules of law that intentionally kept Black people systemically in place in poverty. And so it wasn't that people want to make poor choices. It's often that those communities, as you said, David, that have been disinvested have created situations where people will make poor choices often to survive. So I think that that's one of the things that's hopefully different, is that we're starting to look at people who have served their time, that we don't believe in permanent punishment, and that you can be restored and assisted with investment and supports. Brian Stevenson also says that we're all, better than our worst mistakes. And I wholeheartedly believe that. And so that's why naming and labeling is something that I've loved, that has evolved over time. And words matter.
Right.
And I will leave it at that, but I'm so offended by this whole movement around woke. Right? What is that? What is that? To be aware of the injustice, the inequality, the racism, and the systemic policies that we approve in place? Not acceptable. Just simply not acceptable.
Thank you very much. Great point.
I just, first of all, Reverend Boyd and Jamar, thank you for bringing the reality of dehumanization, to the table, because that really centers us in each one of our own responsibilities within. I remember, I see Rudy Lozano's in the back. We had one of our schools when I was running Instituto del Progreso Latino, the Rudy Lozano Leadership Academy, had a competency that the students needed to have before they graduated, and that was to be a humanizing healer. And that was defined, and that was practice, and you had to show evidence that you were, in fact, a humanizing healer. So I do think that this dehumanization, as you all said, leads to disinvestment. And I think the biggest challenge we're facing today is we're looking for someone else to make the investment. And you know what? We're living in a time when the answer to who's going to make the investment has to be us. Absolutely. It's got to start here. That's right. You say to the federal government, you say, state government, let's just figure out how we start wherever we have the capability to move things. This is an abundant city, with lots of resources. And we just need to figure out what are the right ways to get the resources into the, lived experiences of people, and particularly in our education systems. I would just say, the budgetary state of the public schools today should not be that way. Not in a city like ours with the abundance that we have. We should be able to figure that out.
And part of my question is, why is that particular point so important? Why is that deficit so dangerous for us here and now?
Well, there's so many elements to it, right? Our young people are going to be going through a changing marketplace that is going to be much harder than anything that any one of you in the audience or us have ever faced. And they have to go in fully prepared with all the capabilities that they need. And when you're going through deficit after deficit, you're not thinking forward, you're thinking about what you can keep in place, not what you can necessarily invest into the future. And so we're not future-proofing our young people.
Not future-proofing.
We are not future-proofing our young people, by not having the proper investment in them. And there's even sort of more elements, because we are telling them a story every single day, and it's a story of worth. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. Every single day, they are either being told whether they're worthy or not worthy at the end of the day by the choices that we make, right? And so I just think that part of what we need to be reflecting upon is, what are we as Chicagoans going to be doing? Because I do think that we have voice, we have autonomy, we have values, right? And we can, in fact, put them in place. And when you invest, you cause others to invest, right? And so I think that's the moment that we're in.
Well, that's a really interesting point, because it relates to my next question, which is, what lessons have we forgotten or overlooked about our history that could help us as we look toward the future?
Just on that last one, why it's so what is most dangerous, at least from my perspective, is that we're living in the age of no truth. And so
No truth.
No truth, misinformation. So everything that my colleagues said certainly has truth behind it, but there's an equal number of people that just say that's fake news. This is the most vibrant economy that we've had in our history. We're the richest country in the history of the world, and we're going to do just fine if you would just work harder. And we could kind of talk then about religion and talk about education, and they could just deny everything and say that that is just simply not truth. You're just not following the rules. Follow the rules, you guys, and then you will succeed. And to me, and there's an audience of people that are following this opposite kind of dark truth, if you will. And so for me, that's the most dangerous thing, that we're trying to make sure that our children have the confidence and the spiritual security, and then there's this opposite force saying you're not worth it, and they're saying it's truth, but this guy's saying it's not true. So I think, again, in bringing it back home here to the universities, that we need to be able to combat that, not just with real truth, but also accepting that there are other opinions out there, and that being tolerant to a point where they are heard and then misproven by actual facts and truth. And I think that is the single most dangerous thing, and also the greatest opportunity that we have moving forward.
Ed?
At the risk of being a rule follower for once in my life, I'm going to go back to Laura's question. I think the thing that we've forgotten is that nothing good ever develops top down. It's always bottom up. And there is never a single solution that ever works in every neighborhood in a community that is as diverse and vibrant and different as Chicago. And so, I think that one of the lessons is, I think, to the point that we, I think building on your point that we keep looking for who's going to come to save us, it's nobody but us, right? And it's not going to be the same in my community as it is the pastors, right? It's not going to be the same in any neighborhood, and it's not going to be the same group of people. And part of it is, I think, when I think about that, is that we also need to take a step, just to I think to recognize and remember the lesson that we do better when everybody has the freedom to experiment. I'm hearing the statistics about murder rates and that. I keep thinking about, over the course of the last 30 years in Chicago, we keep thinking there's a, quote, policing strategy that's going to work for the entire city. That's nonsense. What works is the block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, community by community, hard work with people working together and recognizing and identifying where there are problems and where there are problems that necessitate policing and when there are problems that don't. Instead, and we do this instantaneous snapback the minute that something happens to think that the only possible solution can be more policing. And I think that leads me to say that one of the things we forget about the fact that we all desire freedom, but that means letting other people be free. That's the price of freedom for yourself, is letting someone else be free. And in the same way, I think letting other people experiment, using our resources and our talents to let other people, do that, and not feeling like, I think, as all too often happens, that we can have one solution that's going to work for every community. I think those are the lessons we need to get back to and let things grow from that organic level.
When you were talking about this issue, particularly around policing, I thought about the whole debate about curfews for young people, and the fact that some people in the city want to see that applied citywide, or at least applied downtown. Is that one of the examples you might
It absolutely is. I will just say, thank goodness not all of you live the life I live, but in the last week, look at what happened. You had a single shooting in Washington, D.C., and the president wants to completely unwind the legal immigration system in this country. Doesn't think about the impact upon the millions and thousands of people that will have, but because of a death, that is now the reason to do that. And likewise, after 6 months of debate, during which the Chicago Police Department declared that they already have all the authority they need to, address so-called teen takeovers, and that we didn't need a snap curfew that would allow police to, essentially present a curfew anywhere in the city at any time. You have one event in downtown Chicago, and now we're right back into that debate. As we don't learn anything in these things because, and again, we cover this as though, all too often, forgive me, I promise I won't do the media bashing, Laura,
Okay,
today.
that's all right.
But right away, oh, well, there's a solution being offered. It's not a solution. It's never worked. I've said this before, I'll just say on the teen takeover thing, I have been at the ACLU for 26 years. And the first warm weekend of every spring, some event happens somewhere downtown, and I get the call with, well, people think we ought to do more policing. And one year it's a mob action law, and one year it's a curfew, and another year it's this. It is all the same, and we never get to the root causes. We never ask people out in the community, hey, what do you think would work? Instead, it all comes from people sitting in City Hall. And I think there's a better way to address all of those things if we recognize and give people a little freedom to work these things out in many ways at a local level.
Others who have comments on our history, what we might have overlooked, forgotten, Kari and maybe Juan Gonzalez wants to speak?
Yeah, just one thing that I think we've learned that I'm encouraged by as I watch this from Washington, and that is that to underscore your point about things need to come from the grassroots, Chicago has demonstrated tremendous courage and creativity in the grassroots response to the ICE thugs that came and haven't totally left yet. And I feel like one of the great things about the history of Chicago is that we have a history of grassroots innovation, we have a history of protest, we have a history of resistance, and we have a history of courage. Laura and I were kind of raised by Harold Washington. He was a man of courage. The governor is standing out right now in speaking truth to power. He's the best guy. He's speaking more clearly than any other governor in the country, even when there's other federal oppression. But I think to the grassroots point, I feel like hopefully there'll be some additional investment in organizing that will come out of some of the things that are being learned now in the resistance to ICE. And it's possible that a whole generation of young folks will feel more engaged in the possibility of being able to make a change and be more engaged in voting and lead to policy changes. But I think we've kind of forgotten our grassroots power, and we're seeing that now.
Juan Gonzalez.
Yeah, let me put my journalist hat on here for a second. To me, in addition to the growing wealth inequality, the racial character of that wealth inequality, and the way that disinvestment in cities has shifted over the last several decades, I think one of the biggest changes now of the last 30 years has been the technological revolution in information systems. And we're talking about the internet was in its baby years. It was still basically confined to universities back in the 1990s. We've had the development now, not just of the internet and social media, now, of course, the big AI stampede, surveillance. This is our chain. This is our chain. Every one of us carries this everywhere we go. We are being tracked. We are being, all of our thoughts, our desires, every time we put in a new query into the internet, the owners of this platform know how we are thinking. And we don't realize the level of, we have already developed the mechanism in this country for total fascism. And it's all through the surveillance and control of people through the information platforms that have developed. And we're not even talking about biotechnology. We're constantly being bombarded with new drugs. They can't even think of enough names for these drugs. The letters they put together, because they're running out of names in the English language for the new drugs they're constantly creating, and the government can't monitor and check all of these drugs for their safety. What's happening is the technology has run amok because, again, I go back to capitalism. Capitalism is in crisis. This is an empire in decline. They're constantly looking for new markets to be able to sell us new products, mass produce these products that we don't really need, half of them. You know, and so the system is in decline, and it's got to figure out a way, how can we make more money off of people? Now the new thing is subscriptions. I challenge you to add up all the money that you pay in monthly subscriptions, whether it's into Hulu or to this or to that. You're going to find out you're spending an enormous amount of money on subscriptions. Even the poorest folks are involved, are caught up in this. So the system is in decline, and I think that that's been the main change, the technological rapidity, seeking short-term profit over the long-term needs of the American people.
Well said. So technology is here, AI is here. Are there positive things that out of these resources that we can harness for good rather than just become victims of it?
Yes, but the problem is, I'm not saying technology in and of itself is not dangerous. The question is what kind of controls are exercised on it, what kind of public policy debates and decisions are made before the stuff becomes dominant. Right now, data centers are really threatening the environment, the water supply, the electricity. If we don't grab, now luckily a lot of communities are now standing up to data centers and are demanding reforms, because these companies want to build these data centers before people even know that they're in their communities or in their neighborhoods. So there have to be political decisions made to control the technology in the service of the people, and not just in the short-term profit needs of those who are selling the stuff.
Yeah, we did learn, you know, in 2008, the housing crisis, you know, you could say nearly took down this economy, okay? There were certain decisions that were made, you know, that, you know, were prudent decisions at the time that hadn't been made in the past, right? And that was an unregulated market, right? With some regulations, but not the kinds of regulations that you need. You know, we are facing that 10, 20, 30, 100 times with artificial intelligence. We really have to understand that this is not, this can be an asset, you know, and it can be a positive asset, but we have to direct it. You know, we as a society have to direct it, we as people have to direct it. We can't allow it to direct us. And by it, I mean all of the interest around it, right? That will accumulate a great amount of wealth as a result of this. I will speak with a MacArthur hat on, because I am the current chair of the MacArthur Foundation, and we have launched with a number of other foundations something called Humanity AI, you know, to really get us as a society thinking about what are the things that we need to be doing to make sure that you know, AI develops in a manner that is humane and serves the human people at the end of the day. And I do believe that it has the potential for that, but I also believe that regulation and diligence and control, some level of control is going to be necessary for that to occur.
If I can just add on that, we had this fight, most people didn't know about it, back in 1996 over the internet.
Right.
The internet was a publicly funded system that was the National Science Foundation, the people of the United States funded the research into the internet. It was only when it became possible to make money off of it that a debate arose in the highest circles of the United States, and it was the Telecommunications Act of 1996, introduced by Bill Clinton. That's why Al Gore always claimed to have invented the internet. He didn't invent the internet, he helped privatize the internet. And instead of a public utility like the telephone company had been in the past, the internet became privatized, and that's when the companies began to be able to make all this money and sell us all this garbage. We get garbage constantly, and every time we do a search. Why? You know, because there was no regulation of the internet, and that happened during the Clinton years. The worst thing that the Clinton administration ever did was the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Second worst was NAFTA, but the first worst was the Telecommunications Act.
Thank you. So I want to move to another question. I know that, Brenda, this is something I know you said you want to address, and that is about, we talk a lot about the fight and for trying to fight back and push for, push for change, push back on this assault on justice and democracy. Are we fighting smartly? Are we fighting smartly enough? And what needs to change about our fight?
Yeah, thank you. My board president, I will disclose, is the president well, actually not president, he's the CEO now of PolicyLink. Some of you may be familiar with this organization. And I am very much excited and eager to share with you a framework that PolicyLink has put in place around the fight. And PolicyLink is arguing that the U.S. must remake the systems and structures of governing, including values, laws, practices, and indicators, so that serving all becomes the norm. Serving all becomes the norm. And so what this means is that we should establish a rule of law that guarantees equal protection for all people, that creating a consistent and rational body of laws that reflects equity principles, to build a fair and functioning apparatus to enforce those laws, and then we have to move beyond the old standards and replace reactive anti-discrimination measures with proactive outcomes that are based on standards that require human thriving and not just protection from harm. He talks about developing a legal framework that will catalyze and deliver population-level equity outcomes, reversing decades of lawfare that dismantled rights for Black and brown people, indigenous communities, LGBTQ, individuals, immigrants, and the poor. He goes on basically to say that we are the founders. I think someone alluded this. But we have to recognize that the policies and the systems that were created and put in place were not for all. That sense of inclusion and true equity did not include many of us in this room. And so as founders, how do we reimagine systems and policies that are more inclusive, and that we actually have the power to do that? We have community voice and ownership in policy making. We have to shift from top-down government to inclusive structures where there's the closest, where we close these challenges and shape solutions that work for everyone. We have to learn how to better invest in civic engagement and accountability mechanisms. So essentially, the government is responsible for all. Many of us feel left out, and we should, because we weren't included,
Yeah.
right? And so that's part of what we need to do, is to disrupt, not accept the policies that are in place, but reimagine them, reestablish them so that they are inclusive for all.
Do you have an example of way in which we're doing that, or that's something that's evolving now?
You know, I think that this is, I don't have a good example now, but because I think it's just a fresh way of
looking at-
thinking about it. I think we always try to work within the system, but sometimes you have to disrupt that and create a brand new system. And so just adapting that framework, I think, is a really important part of it. And then we talk about democracy. I just wanted to add that an important key site is that democracy does not collapse overnight. It erodes gradually, and then suddenly,
It's
and then you
gone.
wake up.
And it's gone. Thank you. Grace?
Yeah, so thank you, Brenda, for those really important and thoughtful points. And I want to go back to the Reverend down there. It really comes down to what is the most valuable in the society. And I think that we're kind of in end-stage capitalism, right? We're really in an era where we can see capitalism gone completely wild, where money is everything, profit is everything, whether it's AI or something else, it's just people trying to make money. My 29-year-old son is in between jobs, and so he has moved back to our house, and he keeps saying, you know, why are folks not creating enough jobs for people to work? If no one is working, then no one can buy anything that is being produced. The companies keep trying to make more and more things cheaper and cheaper, but you know, if no one has money to buy them, then you really don't have a system. And to Laura's question about how we kind of get back and disrupt the system, we had a glimpse of it during COVID. When everything shut down and everybody's like, what do we do now? You go back to, I have 5 masks and you have, you know, some water, we trade, or we help each other out. And that was the one moment in time that I actually thought was hopeful for humanity, that we finally got past all these systems that were already in place, because they weren't, when you had the shutdown and you had everybody trying to figure out how to solve problems. So if we can go back to, you know, the creativity of learning and experimenting, the mutual aid, and the getting the profit margin, profit mentality out of it, then that is the beginning of how we can change.
Kari?
One of the things that always bothered me during COVID was that commentators and a lot of politicians would say, well, you know, we're going to go back to normal.
Now we have.
Never
We're in-
was normal to begin with.
Right, right, that's so great. We're in a time of great disruption now. Too many people are saying we might, you know, elect a president of a different party in 28, and then things will go back to normal. They won't, because so much has been broken. And so I think it's better if we understand we really are in a period of disruption. We don't imagine it to be more normal than it is. And I think, I want to bring this back to great cities, I think I feel like there's a connection between Chicago's resistance to ICE and the potential for grassroots and civic and foundation initiatives sort of figuring things out. Cities and states are going to be on their own for a while to come, because in addition to wealth inequality, the tax system has been made even more unequal than it was, and federal money's just not going to come back. We've seen some states start to work together to put public health information in place, because the CDC is being broken, that manages federal health data. So I'm sort of thinking about this myself, and I think I hope we can really engage all of our young people in the grassroots, you know, cities as a laboratory of democracy, because we need a new generation of civic leaders and community organization leaders and teachers and people who want to work in government. I mean, what 28-year-old really wants to work in government now?
Yeah.
Some do.
Yeah.
But so I think that one of the exciting things about great cities and the conversation you've brought together is that we really have to build the future we want for our city. And we think we should have support from the outside, but it's not going to come back anytime soon. And so we really should, what did we learn during COVID? And how should we be problem solving given that we are in this deep time of disruption and nothing's going to be the same and the solutions are on us? So I think great cities can play a role in that.
Thank you. And we are going to get, before we end, I'm going to ask all of you for advice or thoughts about what great cities should be doing. I'm going to go to Jamar and then come down here to Ed.
To answer the question, yes, we are fighting. From my perspective, not necessarily smart. In part because I don't think we either understand history, we are willing to engage history, or take the lessons from it. Authoritarianism is as American pie, apple pie. This is not a new system of government or backlash or retaliation. I'm going to speak from a black perspective because that's the perspective I know the best. You get Emancipation Proclamation. We enter this period of Reconstruction. There is an enormous increase in black participation in electoral politics, specifically black men being elected to state legislatures as well as the United States Congress. The first thing this country does is to introduce legislation to roll back black men's access to voting, specifically in the South. I'm from South Carolina. Nobody does it better than South Carolina when it comes to rolling back black folks' rights. Mississippi, Hiram Revels, an instrumental legislator at the United States Congress, and a preacher, named it as a theological evil of the United States of America when it determines that some of its own citizenry is demonic. That is what we are seeing right now, where there is a theological disposition within our politics that have determined the evil within. That is not political, that is theological. That is to name a segment of the population as demonic. Therefore, they are not worthy of being seen as human, as dignified, or holy. Therefore, the retaliation and the backlash that we are seeing is no different than when this country was colonized at the very beginning. To say the current occupants, the current inhabitants of this nation are unholy. Therefore, they are inhuman and do not have any rights, any access. So you get Reconstruction. The backlash is Jim Crow. You get the 80s, Reaganomics. The backlash, poverty is at an astronomical level in urban and rural communities. The Clinton era comes. You can name all the evils you want. That crime bill was an evil that we're paying for right now. So the list goes on, but authoritarianism is not new to this country. And I'm afraid that the people who are fighting aren't talking to black elders. You're not talking to brown elders. You're not talking to black children.
People who've lived in.
You're not talking to any of the people who have the direct impact of what it means to live under authoritarianism, but it scares the hell out of you because now it doesn't matter what color you are.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Ed.
Yeah. If I can attempt to build on that as beautifully and artfully as that was done, I think about the fight. Part of it is naming what it is, and I think a lot about the speech that Vice President J.D. Vance gave at the Claremont Institute a few months ago, in which he said, that people who are descendants of the people who fought for the Confederacy have more stake in this country than people who have come here in recent generations, even if they embrace all of the principles contained in the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. It is to that point, there has been this strain of authoritarianism that has lived in this country since its very founding. Now they have control of the algorithms who decide who we reach and who we don't. That's the fight. That's why, as Juan said, AI, the fight is not about regulating AI, the fight is about regulating the way AI infects our entire society. And so I think that is the fight, and we have to always, even while we do all of the things we do on a micro level, we can never lose sight of where that macro fight actually is happening.
In that fight, I think everyone in this room would consider themselves allies of each other and of you. There are allies that maybe we don't think about, or maybe, what I might say is unlikely allies that need to be brought into this fight. Who might they be? Who are the people we're overlooking, or the types of people we're overlooking that we need to bring into the fight?
I might answer that a little differently.
Okay.
I think we overlook each other. And because we overlook each other, it's hard to, build the kind of strength that you need to build in order to have the kind of impact that we're looking to have. And what I mean by that is that we, our approaches may be different, and we're spending too much time judging and criticizing, the approach, when all approaches may be necessary in order for us to make progress as a people, okay? So if you look at, history, actors acted in the way that made most sense to them at the time, okay? And those actors had followers, right, that were aligned with their methods and their approaches. And each of those actors had an important part to play, in moving, the course of history in a better direction, right? So I think we just need to spend more time making sure that we are an actor, that we are as engaged an actor as possible, that we are respecting and we are celebrating and we are, delighted with the diversity of methods and contributions that are being made. And we're spending most of our time, making the contributions that make the most sense to us, given who we are and how we lead in the position that we're in today, and less time trying to figure out what's that perfect strategy that we need to have,
Yeah.
There is no perfect strategy. The perfect strategy is get up, get out of your house, get off your phone, spend some time listening to other people, and doing something that advances a better world, right? And so I just think a little bit more of that is going to.
Well, I think the fight against ICE here in Chicago is a good example of that.
It's a great example.
Brought together people that normally didn't work together, didn't even know each other from different communities.
Yeah, it's an incredible example, and it brought together people that weren't necessarily even connected. You had a lot of people connected to institutions, but you had a lot of people just coming out, doing, being free people, using their phone, taking a critical action, and that's going to lead to further action in the future. And so, it's a wonderful example.
Maybe just to continue on Juan's point, and going to the previous point on the history and the lessons of history, but I think it's directly connected to Juan's point. It's just to remember that the civil rights movement, the black rights movement was aligned, but also, I think, worry of the women's rights movement, of the migrant movement, Chicano movement, the grapes movement, the LGBT movement, exactly. They were all kind of both a little worried about each other, suspect about each other, intimidated in some ways by each other. But at the end of the day, they figured out that they needed to work together, and you saw eventually embraces that happened. Maybe 2 at a time, 3 at a time, one-offs, but they all happened over the course of time, and they helped us get through that civil rights movement and to earn and to get all those rights that we hold dear today that they are under threat. I think in terms of the allies, so many of us stood together just recently in support of a couple of things. The business community, we put together a group called United for Chicago that included the business community, the civic community, the nonprofit community, the philanthropic community, et cetera. And so the idea was that, hey, we're not going to agree on everything. We certainly aren't going to agree on something as complicated as immigration policy. At least that's what we said. However, we do agree on a couple of things, and one is these tactics that ICE was employing are brutal and inhumane, and at the end of the day, un-American. 2, they are bad for business, and not just for immigrant business and black business, but they're bad for the entire city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, and they need to stop. And then finally, and the point that we wanted to make more clear, it's this is un-American, what is happening in the city of Chicago. And that coalition came together when we made it a point to make sure that we had Republicans in the room. And there are Republicans that believe exactly that these actions were un-American, that they're brutal, inhumane, and they needed to stop. So I think we need to figure out those allies on that other party that are centrist, that believe in human value and American values, and we cannot ignore them, or else we're doomed to fail.
It sounds like that's a great model for future alliances. Anyone else want to talk about unlikely allies? We just have a few more minutes, so I want to make sure we get to great cities or get back to great cities. Kara, you had some great points about what great cities should be thinking about doing. Others who want to weigh in on what's next on great cities or should be on great cities' agenda?
I think from one perspective, and I'm going to speak as a millennial right now, the youngest one on the panel.
Yeah, rub it in.
And best looking.
This is what I do see. Before I came here today, I was with a group, and we were all talking about either our godchildren, our nieces, our nephews, our cousins. I have 2 younger brothers, one who is 24, getting ready to be 25, one who's 13. But the joy of my life is my godson, who's 7. And he's just great. But I'm also cognizant of the way in which he's digesting this world is totally different, and Juan spoke about this, than the way in which I would. I fuss at his parents every time I'm on FaceTime that he's on a tablet. Get him off the tablet. I spend $200 a year in books for a reason, so that he flips the pages and he understands the words that are before him, and that he gets a love for physical knowledge. But also, my brother, who's 24, is in the trading and all of that, and it requires him to be in front of a computer all day long. And there has to be this intergenerational connectivity that is reclaimed within our communities. And I do think that's where the Great Cities Institute plays a vital role, where elder wisdom collaborates with youthful imagination that creates some tangible solutions. We got a whole lot of theories right now, and a whole lot of elders pointing at children, pointing at young adults. You were young too. You made some really bad decisions or not so thoughtful decisions. These children are no different. They are no different. But what they are facing is a world that does not see their humanity. And that is what concerns me, is that we are building a generation or generations that do not see or does not see the humanity of each other. They love each other. They are the most advocating generation, Gen Z and Gen Alpha. But once you get them outside of these spaces, they struggle. They struggle. And then they revert back to this. And now I got to spend 4 days talking about that was wrong, what you saw on TikTok, and let me
Yeah,
tell you why.
yeah. Mhm. Thank you. Others on what great cities needs to do going forward or think about? What?
Yeah, look, stay very focused, obviously, on Chicago. This city is critical, I think, not just to our nation's values, but also, its well-being in the future. Climate change is real, and Chicago will play a very critical role in settling people that will be climate migrants. Not just climate migrants from across the world, but climate migrants from within our country. And we need to be ready for that. In every way, we need to be ready for it, from an infrastructure standpoint, from an education standpoint. We need to be ready for it from a humanistic standpoint, right? And so I think that readiness for the future is something that the Great Cities Institute could stay focused on. Are we ready? And to be ready for the future, you have to be prepared in the present. You have to have a plan for the future that builds on your preparedness for the present. You have to have a realistic understanding of what is your current reality and what is your desired future. And we, I think, have probably among many cities the best shot, I should say, at being a beacon of hope and opportunity and a welcoming place for climate migrants when that does occur.
David?
Yeah, I would just want to build on that. I think it was really fun to see all of the reports that the Great City Institute did over the last 30 years in the video, and thinking about the leadership that the Great Cities Institute played in building communities, places like Pilsen and Bronzeville and the near West Side. And it looks different today than it did 30 years ago, but I do think, just to build on what Juan said, we need to get back to building. And I think if you look at cities that are growing, both kind of in this country and internationally, there are cities that are growing, there are cities that are building. And if you're not building, you're declining. And I worry that we're at a moment where we're spending a lot of time thinking about keeping what we've got or trying to defend what we've got, which is crucial. But I worry that we're missing the larger picture here, which is we've got to continue to build and grow. The fact that we're not significantly adding population, even though we should be, given our advantages with water and land and our strategic geographic location within the country. It frustrates me every day that we're not seeing more growth and building. So I would just encourage the Great Cities Institute to keep doing what you're doing and figure out the tools that we need to continue to grow and build and make those real and meaningful for neighborhoods so that we, as a city and as a region, we can continue to grow.
Just a follow-up, David. Where should we be building? Where should we be growing? Where are the opportunities that we're missing?
Look at the south and west side. I mean, you don't have to go very far from this, from this university to see. We have incredible assets. We have an amazing public transportation system. We have wonderful educational institutions. We have a lake with the greatest source of fresh water in the Western Hemisphere, and yet we suffer from. I think oftentimes it's a question of we get so wrapped up in our own kind of politics and neighborhood, and a lot of it is NIMBY, and I think people just get comfortable. But yeah, I mean, I'm encouraged by things like the Quantum Campus. I mean, if that really works, that will mean for the southeast side of Chicago what steel did 100 years ago will mean for the next 100 years. But those are the kind of strategic investments that we need to be making and looking at to rebuild our neighborhoods.
Brenda?
Yeah, I'm just going to add that we're just one of those nonprofits that you mentioned that has benefited from the incredible capacity building support that UIC has to offer. and to help us to tell a story through data and research that we typically wouldn't have the ability or resources to do is transformative. We're able to tell people now what the impact of mass incarceration is in our community because it's been measured. We can change and influence some of the policies that we talked about. Just real quickly, it's interesting that you did a research with another partner organization in North Lawndale called the North Lawndale Data Book. And in that report, we learned that 2.7% of the residents in North Lawndale work in North Lawndale. That's it. We also learned that $124 million annually leave our community. It leaves. We're not turning the dollar over. And so that has helped us, from that research, rethink how are we creating more local jobs. And we're doing that through our Beloved Cafe, creating jobs as baristas and managers in a cafe and through Sweet Beginnings. We are also excited to show that when you invest and create spaces for people in communities like North Lawndale, the dollar will remain. It will turn over a few times. We've learned again through research that we couldn't do on our own, that 59%, there's been a 59% increase in local spending because we have these social impact businesses. That's powerful. That's the power of partnership with UIC, and that's what I want to encourage you all to continue to do. We're in the process right now of launching a new report, a report that we established in 2002 that helped us understand the impact of mass incarceration in North Lawndale, and we're updating that report in partnership right now with UIC, and we're looking to launch that report sometime, we hope, in Dr. Tim, where are you at? In February, okay, sometime in February, to take a look at what's happened, this longitudinal research. I mean, who could typically do that, right, without a partner like UIC and Great Cities Institute to help us do that? So I encourage you to continue to help those nonprofits and build our capacity and help tell our impact stories. Thanks.
Keep doing what you're doing. That's what the message is. Rick, we'll give you the final word.
Sure, I'll try to be brief, but following on that is the founding directors here, the first and second, were described as being first-class, world-class scholars, and I think we need the Great Cities Institute to continue that tradition. They are, but continue it. Don't forget that first and foremost, we need that scholarship, because most of us on this panel are not scholars. So we require the work that you're doing to be the wind behind our sails, to partner with us. You've also helped develop a report for us. So we need that, and it's essential that you recruit and build like the best possible institute we have. And the reason for that is we need you to help us change the perception of this city, because as terrific as we may think it is, most of the world thinks this is the violence capital of the United States, and we need you to help us change that a little bit at a time with your research, with your partnership. And if I were the mayor of the city of Chicago, I would say we need you to change that perception so that we could bring the Black community back to Chicago in the numbers that we used to have. As we have the climate migrants coming from this country and other places here, the Black community has to be here already to help build this new Chicago back to 3.5 million people, whatever we need to be a sustainable city. That has to happen at the same time. And it could only happen if we have the research and the perception change and the partnership with the media, the nonprofits, civic institution, business, to do it all together. But we need that research to help be a part of that solution.
Well, you may not all be scholars, but you're all brilliant, and you bring wisdom and great analysis and power to the conversation. Thank you. Thank you for all you do.